That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, honestly here, I think I made a pretty big mistake when we were going through and making our first wide receiver video, and that mistake comes down to underrating Drake London. I mean, if you're looking at this prospect profile, there are really no red flags at all. Now, I understand the injury. Yes, we'll get into that in just a second. But overall, looks like Drake London, in my opinion, may be one of the best rookie wide receivers that we have had in quite some time. He's not Jamar Chase. He's not Treylon Burks, but we'll be talking about exactly where he fits in compared to previous classes and where I'm ranking him in this class. But before we get into anything, please go down there, drop that like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel only if you play Dynasty Fantasy Football. I mean, we say this all the time. Well, yes, if you're interested in Drake London, this video may help you out. I promise you, this channel is only going to be talking Dynasty Fantasy Football all off season, and we're probably going to be making a video every single day. So if you subscribe, you're going to be very annoyed. Only subscribe if you play Dynasty. I think that should be it. Oh, actually, one other note. Our Dynasty rankings over there on Patreon are up to date. You can find our wide receiver rankings, our running back rankings, our quarterback rankings. You can get into a Dynasty league with us over there on Patreon. You can get into our Dynasty group chat on Patreon. I mean, you get an in-depth podcast breaking down your Dynasty team when you join. There's so much going on over there on Patreon, but I'm sure 99% of the people watching this video already know about that. And that should be it. Let's go through. Let's dive into Drake London here. And of course, the first thing that people are going to bring up is the size with Drake London. I mean, this man is 6'5", 210 pounds. Now, of course, these are not official numbers, but to be completely honest, size really doesn't matter too much at the wide receiver position in terms of, I mean, how you're projecting these wide receivers from college to the NFL. Because, I mean, if they can go out there and they can be Devontae Smith and they can be very successful at Alabama at a lighter weight, why does that size matter too much when they're then transitioning to the NFL? I mean, if we've already seen them be successful at the previous level with that same exact size. So, I mean, I'm not too worried about him coming in and maybe not being 6'5". Maybe instead he's 6'4". Who the hell cares? This is a wide receiver that is, I mean, just exciting to say the least. I know a lot of people want to say he's Mike Evans. Mike Evans was an elite level prospect in that 2014 NFL draft class. Nonetheless, with Drake London here, this is a wide receiver that you could be excited. I mean, maybe he does have some boosted touchdown upside based on his height. And usually I'm the guy avoiding Kevin White. I'm the guy avoiding Brashad Perriman because historically in Dynasty, those players that come in and, I mean, have the freakish size. I mean, Dorial Green-Beckham is another great example. People get a little bit too excited because they see big, tall, fast. I mean, this is going to be someone that has a ton of upside, where a lot of times that's not necessarily true, and people overlook what we have with the production side of things and trying to project these players to the next level. But Drake London has that production profile. Now, of course, before we get into it, we do have to mention that he fractured his ankle last October. Based on everything that I am reading, and please, 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 go to the comment section. This could be one thing that maybe I read a false report. I'm not sitting here acting like I got to go and talk to Drake London himself and say, hey, man, when are you going to be ready? You're going to be good to go for the start of the season? Of course, I didn't get to do that, but nonetheless, everything that our breeding says that this injury shouldn't really be that worrisome with Drake London. Maybe we don't get his combine numbers. Maybe we don't get to see him, I mean, through the pre-draft process. To be completely honest, if he was a running back, I would be concerned with that. I would definitely be concerned. I'd want to see his official size. I want to see his, official athletic testing. That's why we haven't covered these running backs yet to an in-depth point as we've done the wide receivers, because the NFL Combine is going to matter a lot. But if Drake London does not participate in the NFL Combine and it becomes almost an afterthought in fantasy, where everybody instead's going through and talking about David Bell, everybody's talking about, Chris Olave, maybe that opens up a window where you can get a discount on Drake London and your rookie draft. And the reason I'm going to be going through and aggressively targeting him is because he has exactly what you want to see. This is a wide receiver that was incredibly productive in college. Not only was he incredibly productive, but he was at a very young age, where right now he is only 20 and a half years old. I mean, he is going to be close to 20 years old when this season starts for him, his rookie year. That is fantastic. I mean, just knowing that if you do get that rookie season production, remember what happened with Juju Smith-Schuster in Dynasty. Remember when Juju produces at 20 years old in Dynasty? I mean, I know he's another USC wide receiver, not bringing up that comparison because of so, more so just because of the age. When you have those wide receivers producing at such a young age in Dynasty, that gets the Dynasty fantasy football community willing to buy in on them, and that makes their Dynasty value skyrocket. The perfect example of that is look at Juju Smith-Schuster versus Terry McLaurin after their rookie seasons. With Juju Smith-Schuster, based on him being 20 years old after his rookie season, people were going through and making him a top 24 Dynasty pick in startup drafts. Whereas with Terry McLaurin, after his rookie season, while yes, he definitely went through and he rose up with his own Dynasty value, he wasn't close to being in that same range because his production was at 23 years old. So naturally, the Dynasty fantasy football community wasn't as impressed and they weren't willing to project him to make some massive leaps. Where here with Drake London, if he does produce as a rookie, which all signs point to the fact that he should be able to, I mean, we know that he is one player that also, throwing the fact that he's 6'5", throwing the fact that he looks every part of being an alpha wide receiver, you could naturally see that his Dynasty fantasy football value may jump up as it did with DK Metcalf, as it did with Juju Smith-Schuster, these younger options at the position. But going through, and more important than anything, is going to be his production in college, but his production with context behind it. Of course, you can't just look at a spreadsheet and go, this wide receiver had this many yards, he's better than this wide receiver who had this many yards. Of course, it's not that simple. NFL general managers, NFL scouts, I mean, millions and millions and millions of dollars are invested into these systems based on the ability of being able to look a little bit deeper than that and trying to identify, a wide receiver more than just his receiving yards per game. But if you go in and if you just kind of contextualize the production that you have, I mean, you can actually really effectively predict what wide receivers are going to be just better than average at the next level. And here with Drake London, he comes out as a true freshman, which we've discussed being so damn important before. I mean, what you need is to have that breakout season by the time you're a true sophomore to meet the minimum threshold that we've identified with our historical research in our Dynasty Rookie Draft Guide. But now, if you see that production as a true freshman, that is fantastic. That changes your class of wide receiver to being so much more appealing. And what's interesting with Drake London is he's not a Treylon Burks. He doesn't go to Arkansas and has no competition for targets in that system and then produces a true freshman. I mean, here, Drake London, he goes to USC. USC is notable because they have multiple other NFL wide receivers on that roster. In 2019, you had Michael Pittman on the team. Not only did you have Michael Pittman, I mean, Drake London goes to this team. He's 17 years old, essentially. Drake London starts the season about at 17 years old. Yes, he just turned 18. He was right there at 17 years old. I would call him a 17-year-old, kind of like Brandon Cooks back in that 2014 draft class. But nonetheless, extremely young. Michael Pittman was a senior. Michael Pittman was 22 years old. And then you also have Amon-Ra St. Brown on this same roster. And Amon-Ra St. Brown himself, I believe he was a 5-star prospect coming out because, of course, you had all the hype around his brother Equanimeous St. Brown. And everybody was saying, oh, Amon-Ra is going to be better, blah, blah, blah. Turns out that ended up being true, but neither of them nearly as good as, they were projected to be. That doesn't really matter. Nonetheless, what does matter is the fact that there was serious target competition on this team. So it would be completely understandable for Drake London, a wide receiver that's damn near 17 years old, to not be able to get on the field early, to not be able to produce. However, that did not happen. He comes out, averages almost 71 receiving yards a game. Compare this to Michael Pittman at 98, who's 4 or 5 years older than him. Compare this to Amon-Ra St. Brown, who is right there at 80 receiving yards per game. So they are in the same exact class, yet you have Drake London just getting this team and being so much younger. So he's able to account for over 20% of his team's receiving yards his true freshman season at an incredibly young age in the context of the offense where he honestly probably shouldn't have been able to do that. Now, going to his true sophomore year, obviously you have Michael Pittman leaving to the NFL, and you would naturally assume that he's going to get a massive jump up, but you would still assume that maybe Amon-Ra St. Brown as a junior rather than Drake London as a sophomore, maybe St. Brown's going to be the more productive wide receiver. Well, no, you actually had Drake London becoming the wide receiver 1 this season. Now, keep in mind, it was USC. Keep in mind that this was a 2020 season that was cut short for the teams in this conference, but still, Off a small sample, he averages over 83 receiving yards a game, accounts for 26% of his offense, and outproduces Amara St. Brown, who is a junior that season on a per-game basis. So, I mean, just going through, you see the natural step up. He becomes the wide receiver one here when he probably shouldn't have been the wide receiver one, knowing how young he was. And then going to 2021, it becomes even better than that. Because 2021, then you get Amara St. Brown leaving to go to the NFL, and all of a sudden Drake London is on a roster where he can dominate targets. And you kind of need to see him dominate targets if you want to jump him up and even a higher tier. And that's what happens. He comes out in 2021 and he has 11 receptions a game. He has 135 receiving yards a game, which we need to contextualize that. That is 45%. 45% of the passing offense on a per game basis went to Drake London. Can we take a step back? Can we remember what you were looking at with some of the other wide receivers in this draft class? I know someone like David Bell, everybody wants to get incredibly excited about. Well, David Bell, his junior season was down there at 34% of his offense. I mean, going over and looking at Garrett Wilson. Yes, with Garrett Wilson, he's playing alongside Jackson Smith-Njigba. Yes, he's playing alongside Chris Olave. So it's a little bit of a different scenario, but he's at 26% of his offense. And even when you didn't have Jackson Smith-Njigba there commanding a lot of volume, his true junior season, he was at 34% of the offense, never coming close to that same level that you actually have from Drake London. And looking at Treylon Burks did not even get to this mark. Now, Treylon Burks, I still think you have to have him as your wide receiver one with Treylon Burks. I mean, he really has no red flags at all. He's not injured. This is also a massive wide receiver that's going to be more athletic than Drake London at the same time. But to look at Drake London, this was unbelievable production. And then obviously he fractures his ankle, so we don't get to see him play out the season. Nonetheless, to look at this, I think you can be so damn excited. And then going over and looking at the projected NFL draft capital, which I hate talking about this time and time again. It's so funny that people playing Dynasty Fantasy Football, like, trust me, I want to believe that I'm a genius. I want to believe that I am, but in reality, I'm an idiot. And you have to look at that NFL draft capital and you have to take it serious. I mean, a perfect example of this is going back this past season, Kadarius Toney. I mean, with Kadarius Toney, this was a wide receiver that goes in the first round. And I can admit, while yes, I hated the Kadarius Toney prospect profile, once he goes in the first round and we're getting him in the third round of Dynasty rookie drafts, I'm taking him every single time. And that's an exaggeration. He wasn't going in the third. He was more so going around the 207, 208 range. I mean, in a 12-team Superflex league. But another example of this is going back to that 2020 draft class. I was all about taking Justin Herbert. I mean, Justin Herbert was one of my most drafted rookies alongside someone like A.J. Dillon, alongside someone like Chase Claypool. Because if you were looking at the NFL draft capital, you were getting a massive discount in Dynasty rookie drafts based on the idea that the Dynasty community thought they knew more. We can say the same thing about how we were drafting Josh Allen everywhere, how we were drafting Daniel Jones, who I know Daniel Jones hasn't necessarily panned out, but I think if you stand by that process and every once in a while, if you identify the few players that the Dynasty community is going to be either way higher on than their NFL draft capital or way lower on, then you can have some clear stay away or some clear buy low candidates at whatever position you may be discussing. And of course, it's not as simple as just going, okay, Chris Olave gets drafted over Drake London. We're taking Chris Olave over. No, you can't narrow it down just to that. But we definitely can look at the fact that, say, Drake London right now is projected to be the 25th pick off the board. He's projected to go ahead of David Bell by over an entire round. And I'm sitting here going, why the hell would the Dynasty Fantasy Football community prefer having David Bell over someone like Drake London? Now, of course, this isn't just, real NFL draft capital numbers. These are going to be projections based on NFL mock draft database.com. I believe that's the name of this site. Yes, it is. But still, it's going to be impactful in what we are talking about now with projecting their dynasty value, because this site goes through and it combines all the mock drafts throughout the entire season and compiles it into one sort of ADP. So to then take a step back and to try to identify where we should be ranking Drake London in our rookie wide receiver rankings, I think that we honestly are going to be shaping this up. And y'all know one thing that we crushed last season is last year we went through, and before anybody else was able to, we kind of started breaking down our tiers of Dynasty rookies. And we were trying to figure out what was the draft pick we needed to be targeting. Last year, we identified that being the 109, because at the 109, that was the last pick that you were going to get someone like Javonte Williams. That was the last pick that you were going to get one of those blue chip prospects. And then the tier below that, that's when you start to get to the Rashad Bateman, the Elijah Moore, the players that, yes, were exciting, but they were a clear tier below everybody else. So one thing that I'm trying to do right now with our Dynasty rookie rankings is I'm trying to go through and break down the tiers. And I know a lot of people have Drake London down there as their wide receiver 4. I can't get behind that. Drake London not only is going to be a top 3 wide receiver for me, I think that we are starting to break down this class. And in my opinion, and of course, I'm recording this in December, okay? The NFL draft is not for another 5 months. We are going to get so much more data. There are going to be a lot of people significantly smarter than me that have insights I just don't have access to coming out, pumping out analysis. And my opinion is subject to change. But I want to begin to try to figure out how these tiers are going to break down. I just want a rough estimate. And right now, I think there's going to be a tier of 3 wide receivers at the top in this rookie draft class. I think you have Treylon Burks, Garrett Wilson, and Drake London. Now, of course, I'm going to try to find some more information about this fractured ankle and what that may mean for his rookie season. But to go with this, I think you can be an extremely excited Dynasty player if you get Drake London in your rookie draft, knowing that not only does he have the elite level production, but if you look a little bit deeper into the numbers, it's even more impressive than it is on the surface. So hopefully we get Drake London in Dynasty ADP, a tier below. I think people are going to decide to take someone like David Bell. I think people are going to decide to go through and take, someone like Chris Olave possibly over Drake London, especially if we go through this pre-draft process. And you actually see those other wide receivers kind of rising up rankings a little bit, where Drake London may be falling because he's not at the NFL Combine, whereas maybe he's not being able to go through and participate in those drills if the fractured ankle doesn't allow him to. I can tell you right now, I think he's probably going to be one of my most drafted wide receivers. It's way too early to say that, of course, because we are currently sitting in December. But nonetheless, thank you all so much for checking out this video. Thank you so much for being a part of the flock. If you have not done so already, go down there, drop that like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. And yeah, you can find all our rankings over there on Patreon. Of course, you can get into a Dynasty League with us over there on Patreon. We got a ton of stuff going on. And oh yeah, please don't subscribe if you're just a fan of Drake London. Only subscribe if you play Dynasty Fantasy Football. I think that should be it. Thank you, and I hope you have a great day.